I stood at the doorway, my suitcase clutched tightly in my hand, staring into the ghost of my childhood room. The posters I had loved were ripped from the walls. My precious books were unceremoniously dumped in dusty cardboard boxes, and in their place, a stranger's life had bloomed. My brother's wife's colorful dresses hung with an air of permanence in the closet that was once mine. The silence was shattered by my mother's voice, sharp and without warmth. "Ifua, you'll have to find somewhere else now. This is Yuma's room." My chest tightened, a painful knot forming right below my ribs, but I forced my face to remain a calm mask. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea about the single, folded paper I was hiding in my bag, and when I finally pulled it out, their world would freeze. Ifua stepped into her family house with a hopeful smile, the wheels of her suitcase rolling a cheerful tune behind her. She had been away for so many long years, studying until her eyes burned, working until her body ached, all the while dreaming of this very moment. The moment she would finally return home and fall into the comforting embrace of her own room. But the smile on her face melted the instant she pushed the door open. The walls, which had once been a canvas for her dreams and posters, were stripped bare. The shelves that had groaned under the weight of her beloved books stood empty and silent. The closet where she had carefully folded her clothes was now bursting with bright, unfamiliar dresses and expensive-looking bags that did not belong to her. Her bed was covered with Uma's things, arranged so perfectly it felt like a deliberate statement, as though Ifua had never existed there at all. She stood frozen in the doorway, her heart sinking like a stone in water, as her eyes desperately searched for any sign that this was all a terrible mistake. Her childhood photos were gone. The little treasures she had collected from school, the memories she had cherished, were all stuffed into old boxes and shoved carelessly into a dark corner. Everything in the room screamed one cold, hard truth: her place had been taken from her. Just then, her mother walked in, her expression casual, as if nothing was wrong. "Ifua, you'll have to use the couch for now. This is Uma's room now. She is Kofi's wife, and she needs her comfort." The words, spoken so lightly, struck Ifua with the force of a physical blow. After all the years of sacrifice, after working so hard in silence to make them proud, she had been erased from her own home without a single word, a single discussion. Amma entered the room then, a polite but unapologetic smile on her face, as if it was her natural right to be there. She touched one of the dresses hanging in the closet and said softly, her voice like smooth poison, "I hope you don't mind. I really need the space." Ifua's chest felt so tight she could barely breathe. Mind? How could she not mind? That room was so much more than just four walls. It was her entire childhood, her sanctuary, the only space in the world where she had always, without question, felt she belonged. Ifua swallowed the lump of pain in her throat, forcing herself to stay calm. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation, but her voice was trapped inside her. She could already see from the firm expressions on her parents' faces that they would defend Amma, their new daughter-in-law, no matter what. To them, Yuma's marriage to their son gave her more value, and she, their own daughter, had suddenly become less important. She pulled her suitcase closer, the handle cold against her trembling hand. Feeling like an unwelcome guest in the house she had always called home. The warm, loving welcome she had pictured in her mind for years was gone, replaced by a chilling sense of invisibility. In that moment, Ifua realized this wasn't just about a room being taken away. It was about being told, in no uncertain terms, that she no longer had a place in her own family. Ifua sat quietly in the living room, her suitcase a loyal companion by her side. A small, foolish part of her still hoped her parents would look at her, see the pain in her eyes, and realize how deeply unfair it was to give her room away without even asking. But when she finally found the courage to speak, her father simply leaned back in his favorite armchair and shook his head with a sigh of disappointment. "Ifua, you have to understand," he said, his tone firm and final. "Amma is married to Kofi now. She is part of this family in a bigger way than you are. She deserves her comfort." The words cut through her like 1,000 tiny knives. A bigger way. She was their daughter. The one who had taken her first steps in this house. The one who had carried their name with pride. The one who had sacrificed for years to build a future. But now, it seemed her value had been measured against Uma's and found to be lacking. Her mother quickly added, her voice attempting to sound gentle, "You're still young and you're not married yet. You'll find your own place soon enough. But Uma, she belongs here with Kofi. We can't make her sleep on the couch. It would bring shame to our family in front of everyone." Efua's lips trembled as she tried to form a reply. But this is my room. It has always been my room. I only left for school. I thought when I came back, I would still belong here. Her mother's expression softened for a fleeting moment, a flicker of the mother she remembered, but it hardened again just as quickly. Efua, don't be so childish. You should be happy for your brother and his new wife. One day, when you get married, your husband's family will give you respect, too. Respect. The word echoed in Efua's mind like a cruel joke. How could they speak of respect when they had just stripped her of every last shred of her dignity in her own home? It was painfully clear now. Her worth in their eyes was not based on who she was as a person or what she had accomplished through her own hard work. It depended entirely on marriage. Kofi walked in during the conversation, his arm wrapped possessively around Oma. He glanced at Efua with a dismissive look and said casually, "Sister, don't make this into a big issue. You've been gone for years. Things change. Amma needs the space more than you do right now." His words carried no trace of sympathy, only a quiet finality that pushed her further away. It was as if her feelings didn't matter in the slightest. Oma stood silently beside him, her face calm, almost smug. She didn't need to say a single word. The unwavering support of Efua's parents had already declared her the winner. Efua felt crushed, her chest heavy with a pain so deep it felt physical. She looked around the house that had once felt so warm and full of love, and now it seemed cold, sterile, and foreign. She was still their daughter, but at that moment, she felt like a complete stranger, cast aside for someone who had only just entered their lives. She lowered her eyes, a devastating truth settling over her. This was not her home anymore. The dining table was full that evening. Plates of steaming food were passed from hand to hand, and laughter echoed through the room. But Efua sat quietly in the corner, trying her best to become invisible. She had always loved these boisterous family dinners, but tonight, everything felt wrong. Every smile seemed forced, every word carried a hidden sting. And she could feel judgmental eyes on her that no longer held any warmth. As the meal progressed, the whispers began. An aunt leaned toward another relative, speaking just loud enough for Efua to hear clearly. "Look at Kofi and Oma. They are doing so well. At their age, they are already building a strong future together." Another voice quickly followed, soft but sharp as a needle. "And Efua, she has been away for all these years. What does she really have to show for it? No husband, no real achievements to speak of." The words stung like fire. She gripped her fork tightly under the table, her knuckles turning white, forcing herself not to show any reaction. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of calm. Each whisper felt heavier than the last, pressing down on her. One cousin let out a small chuckle and said, "Well, at least Oma has a proper place in this house now. Poor Efua doesn't even have a room anymore." A few people laughed. And though the sound was brief, it was enough to burn itself into her memory. Efua's mother tried to brush off the comments. But instead of defending her own daughter, she said lightly, "Oh, she will settle down one day. For now, let's focus on Kofi and Uma. They are the pride of this family." Pride. The word sliced through her like a blade. She wondered if all her years of grueling study, all her silent struggles to succeed in a difficult city, meant absolutely nothing to them. Amma smiled sweetly as relatives showered her with praise for her cooking, her patience, her perfect portrayal of the ideal wife. Kofi basked in the compliments, puffing out his chest and boasting about his future plans. All the while Efua sat, in her corner, a ghost at her own family's feast, invisible in the very house that was once her safest place in the world. She wanted to stand up and shout, to remind them all that she was not useless, that she had a life and successes they knew nothing about. But she bit her tongue. Her silence was not a sign of weakness. It was a strategy. While they laughed and looked down on her, she was building a storm inside her mind. She knew something they didn't. She held a secret that would turn the tables in a way they could never possibly imagine. But for now, she let them mock her. She let them believe she was powerless and alone. The humiliation was a heavy cloak, but she wore it with a quiet dignity. Each cruel comment was another piece of fuel. Each condescending laugh was another reminder of why she had to remain strong and wait for the perfect moment. Efua looked around the table one last time, her lips curving into the smallest, most secret of smiles. They thought they were breaking her, but in truth, they were only sharpening her resolve. Her next move would change everything. Efua walked through the house quietly later that night, her footsteps making no sound on the familiar floorboards. Everyone in this house thought she was the same naive young girl who had left years ago, the one they could easily dismiss and talk down to. Not a single person here knew what she had really been doing all those years in the city, and she had given them no reason to suspect otherwise. She kept her secret locked away, guarding it like a precious jewel, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal it. Back in the city, Ifua had lived a life that was a world away from what her parents imagined. While they assumed she was struggling to get by, she had been climbing her way up the ladder of success with a fierce and quiet determination. She started with small, tiring jobs, saving every single coin she earned, never wasting a single opportunity that came her way. She studied late into the night, took extra courses to improve her skills, and pushed herself harder than anyone she knew. Slowly but surely, her relentless work began to pay off. Her efforts caught the eye of a powerful company director who saw her untapped potential. Within a surprisingly short time, she rose through the ranks, achieving a position higher than anyone, including herself, had ever expected. What her parents and relatives didn't know was that Ifua was no longer just an ordinary office worker. She had become a woman of influence and authority. She had earned a respected position that gave her power over major properties, important contracts, and decisions that affected many lives. Her late grandmother, the one person who had always believed in her without reservation, had also left her a secret gift, a gift her parents never spoke of. While they were busy dismissing Ifua, her grandmother had quietly and legally transferred the rights to a house, rights that now rested entirely in Ifua's hands. That house was not just any house. It was the very home her parents were currently living in, the same house where they were treating her like a stranger. Ifua knew this truth gave her immense power, but she did not rush to use it. She wanted to see just how far her family would go, how deep their favoritism for Uma truly ran, and how easily they could cast her aside. She listened to every insult, endured every moment of humiliation, and held her tongue. But inside, her heart was steady and strong, because she knew a secret that none of them did. Her professional position and her legal rights made her far more powerful than they could ever believe. In the eyes of her family, she was still just the unmarried daughter, the one who hadn't achieved enough to be worthy of respect. But in reality, she had achieved more than Kofi and Uma combined ever would. The same relatives who whispered about her failures would soon learn that she was not the helpless girl they imagined her to be. She carried herself with a quiet calm, allowing them to underestimate her at every turn. It was her greatest advantage. They were all too busy praising Kofi's marriage and Uma's cooking to notice the quiet, determined fire burning in her eyes. Ifua kept her secret close, but her heart knew the day was coming when she would no longer need to hide. The very moment they pushed her too far, the truth she carried would shatter their pride and turn their comfortable world completely upside down. That night, after the long, draining day of whispers and stares, Ifua tried to find a place to rest. Her room was gone, her personal belongings were packed away in boxes like unwanted junk, and all that was left for her was the lumpy old couch in the living room. She placed her suitcase beside it and spread a thin blanket over the cushions, trying to convince herself that this was only temporary. But deep inside, she felt the sharp sting of being treated like a burden in her own childhood home. As she carefully lowered herself onto the couch, Oma walked past, holding a cup of steaming tea. She paused, her eyes glancing down at Ifua with a look that held no warmth, only a cold sort of pity. Then, in a voice that was smooth but laced with cruelty, she said, "You should be grateful you even have a roof over your head. At least you're not sleeping outside on the street." The words were sharp, deliberately meant to cut, and they sank deep into Ifua's heart. Ifua froze, her gaze fixed on the cracks in the ceiling. Her fists clenched tightly under the thin blanket, her nails digging painfully into her palms. She wanted to answer back, to remind Uma that this was her house long before Uma had ever stepped foot in it, that the very room Uma now occupied was her room, her space, but her lips remained sealed. She refused to give Ama the satisfaction of seeing her break down. Ama let out a small, triumphant smirk and walked away, humming a cheerful tune as if she had just won a great victory. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway that once belonged to Ifua, a hallway she now claimed as if it had never been anyone else's. Ifua bit down hard on her lip, fighting back the hot tears that burned in her eyes. She had faced incredible struggles in the city, she had worked through countless sleepless nights, but nothing she had ever experienced compared to the searing pain of being humiliated in her own home by her own family. Her parents said nothing. They moved around the house as if her suffering was completely invisible, as if she should simply accept her place on the couch and keep her mouth shut. The silence from them hurt almost more than Uma's cruel words. It was a confirmation that she had been pushed aside, her dignity stripped away without a second thought. As she lay awake that night, the springs of the old couch digging into her back, Efua's heart ached with a profound sadness, but her mind grew sharper with every passing hour. Every insult, every slight, every careless word from Uma and her family was building up inside her like a powerful storm waiting to be unleashed. She would not let herself crumble. She would not let her tears become their victory. Ifua closed her eyes, gripping the blanket tightly. She knew this was her breaking point, but not in the way they expected. They thought they had finally defeated her, but what they had truly done was awaken a strength she had been keeping quiet for far too long. Soon, very soon, the tables would turn, and Uma's mocking words would come back to echo in her own ears as shame. Efua's suitcase sat quietly in the corner of the living room, in the exact same spot she had left it when she first arrived. Tucked inside the front pocket of that suitcase was a plain brown envelope. To anyone else, it looked completely ordinary, but Efua knew it held the power to shatter the cruel reality being built around her. That envelope contained the legal papers her grandmother had signed long before she passed away. The very documents that made Efua the one and only rightful owner of the house her parents and brother were treating as if it was theirs to command. Each time she glanced at her bag, her heart tightened, not from fear, but from the immense weight of the secret she carried. She could have pulled it out that very first night, when her mother coldly told her the room now belonged to Uma. She could have revealed it during the humiliating dinner, when her relatives mocked her for not being as successful as Kofi and Uma. She could even have thrown it in Uma's smug face when she taunted her for sleeping on the couch, but Efua did not. She remained quiet, choosing patience over anger because she needed to see just how far they would push her, how deep their disrespect truly ran. Her parents moved around the house as if she were a ghost, giving Uma the best chair at the table, praising her for the smallest, most insignificant things, all while treating Efua as though she brought nothing but shame to the family. Kofi walked around proudly with his wife on his arm, never once stopping to defend his own sister from the subtle and overt cruelty, and Uma, feeling completely untouchable, spoke to Efua with thinly veiled insults, reminding her again and again that she no longer had a place there. Efua carried the hurt silently, but every painful moment only made her resolve stronger. She would touch the envelope late at night when the house was dark and silent, running her fingers over its crisp edges, reminding herself of the incredible power hidden within. It wasn't just paper. It was her grandmother's unwavering belief in her, a final gift of protection that no one else in the world knew about. She studied her family with a new, careful perspective, noting every hurtful word, every dismissive action, every quiet betrayal. She wanted them to reveal their true hearts completely before she made her move. She wanted them to show the full depth of their favoritism and their cruelty so that when the truth finally came out, they could never deny how deeply wrong they had been. Efua's silence was not a weakness. It was preparation. It was a strategy. She moved about the house calmly, speaking very little, but watching everything with sharp, observant eyes. Her family thought they were winning, that they had successfully broken her spirit, but in reality, she was the one holding all the cards. The moment she finally opened that envelope and placed the documents before them, their comfortable, self-righteous world would collapse into a pile of shock and shame. So she waited. She waited for the perfect time, the moment when her silence would no longer protect them, but would instead expose them all. The hidden document sat quietly in her bag, like a storm gathering its strength just over the horizon, and Efua knew that when it finally broke, every word of humiliation she had endured would be returned with the stunned silence of those who once mocked her. The house was full that afternoon. Relatives from near and far had gathered for a family get-together, and the air was thick with laughter and chatter. Plates piled high with food covered the long dining table, children ran around happily, and the elders sat in small groups, discussing family matters with serious faces. Efua sat quietly in a corner, doing her best not to draw any attention to herself. She had learned over the past few days to stay silent, even when the whispers and side comments stung like angry bees, but nothing could have prepared her for what her parents said that day. It began with a simple conversation. One of the uncles asked about Uma and how she was adjusting to her new life in the family home. Efua's father straightened up in his seat, his voice booming with pride. Ama is doing very well. We gave her Efua's old room, you know, the best one in the house. She deserves it. After all, she contributes to this family now. The words felt like a sharp slap across Efua's face. Her chest tightened, making it hard to breathe, but she forced herself not to react. She hoped, prayed, that her father would stop there. But he didn't. He went on, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. Efua has been away for years. And yet, what has she really brought back? No husband, no children, no real success to show for herself. She doesn't contribute anything important. That is why we decided Amma should have comfort. Her mother nodded in firm agreement, adding her own cruel twist. It is true. We cannot compare the two. Amma is already proving herself as a devoted wife, while Efua still behaves like a child. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the good of the family. The room grew uncomfortably quiet for a moment. Some relatives shifted in their seats, glancing at Efua with expressions of pity. Others tried to cover their shock with nervous, tight-lipped smiles. Then, as if to pour salt on her gaping wound, Amma smiled softly and said, "I am so grateful for the room. It makes me feel like a true part of the family." Several relatives clapped lightly, praising her for her humility. Efua sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly under the table that her knuckles were white. She felt the hot sting of humiliation spreading through her entire body. Every word they had spoken was like another heavy stone thrown directly at her. She swallowed hard, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. She wanted to scream, to shout at them for reducing her to nothing in front of everyone she knew, but she didn't. She sat there in complete silence, her face a calm, unreadable mask, even as her heart burned with a fiery rage. Inside, however, something fundamental shifted. It was no longer just pain she felt. It was a cold, hard resolve. She had endured the whispers, the mockery, the insults, and now this public shaming. They had systematically stripped away her dignity in front of her entire family, and that was the final straw. She realized in that instant that she could not let this continue for a single moment longer. That day, as she sat among relatives who looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, Efua made a silent, unbreakable decision. Enough was enough. The time for silence was over. The moment to reveal the truth was drawing near, and when it came, no one at that table would ever forget it. The atmosphere in the room was still heavy after her father's public declaration. The loud laughter had faded into hushed murmurs, and the only sound left was the quiet clinking of plates and cutlery. Efua sat silently, her eyes lowered, but inside, her heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. She had carried the pain long enough. Now, she knew without a doubt, the moment had finally come. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her bag, the same bag that had sat untouched in the corner since her return. Every eye in the room turned toward her as she placed it gently on the table. Her parents looked at her with curiosity mixed with annoyance, assuming she was about to make another childish complaint. Amma smirked, whispering something into Kofi's ear that made him chuckle. But Efua said nothing at all. Instead, she opened the front pocket of the bag and pulled out the plain brown envelope she had guarded so carefully. Her fingers did not shake. She slid the papers out, placed them neatly on the center of the table in front of everyone. And finally, she lifted her eyes. "What is this now?" her father asked, his tone sharp with irritation. Efua's voice was calm, almost unnervingly calm, as she replied, "These are the documents my grandmother left in my name. This house is mine, legally and entirely mine." The words dropped like a heavy stone into the silent room. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. All the relatives froze, their eyes widening in utter disbelief. Her father's jaw went slack. Her mother's hand flew to her chest in a gesture of shock. Kofi's condescending smile vanished instantly. Amma just stared at the papers on the table, all the color draining from her face, her confidence crumbling away like sand, as the devastating truth began to sink in. Efua pushed the documents closer so that everyone could see the official signatures and the undeniable government stamps. "Grandmother transferred ownership to me before she passed away," she continued, her voice remaining firm and steady. "She trusted me with this house because she believed in me. While you all mocked me for being worthless, she saw my worth. And every single word you spoke tonight only proved why she made the right choice." The silence in the room grew heavier, more suffocating. Relatives leaned in to get a better look at the papers, whispering frantically among themselves. Some nodded slowly, a look of dawning understanding on their faces. Others looked at her parents, waiting for them to deny it. But they couldn't. The proof was right there on the table, in black and white. Her father opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her mother looked down at her lap, her face burning with shame. Kofi clenched his fists by his side, anger and helplessness warring in his eyes, while Uma's face was a mask of pure shock. The very room they had so proudly given to her now belonged to Ifua, and the power in the family had just shifted completely. Ifua sat back in her chair, her expression calm, almost serene. For the first time since returning home, she did not feel small or invisible. She felt powerful. They had thought she was nothing, but now the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. The house was hers, and with that one simple revelation, the entire table was left in a state of stunned, absolute silence. The moment the documents touched the table, the entire world seemed to shift on its axis. For several long seconds, no one moved, as if the whole room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Then the murmurs began, soft and uncertain at first, like ripples spreading through still water. Relatives leaned closer to one another, whispering urgently, their eyes darting from the papers to Afua's impossibly calm face. Kofi was the first to finally react. He shoved his chair back from the table with a loud scrape, his face a mask of furious disbelief. "This can't be true," he said sharply, his voice trembling despite his effort to sound confident. He snatched one of the papers, his eyes scanning it frantically, but the bold letters, the official stamps, and the clear signatures left no room for argument. His hands shook as he dropped it back onto the table as if it had burned him, his eyes wide with shock. Uma's face was completely white. Just moments ago, she had been smiling with pride, sitting comfortably in the seat of honor that everyone treated as hers by right. Now, she looked as though the floor had been ripped out from under her. But how?" she whispered, her voice breaking. She glanced desperately at Kofi for some kind of reassurance, but he had no answers to give her. Her hands clutched her lap so tightly her knuckles were bone white, as if holding on could stop her from crumbling in front of everyone. Their parents were even more shaken. Ifua's father leaned forward, his forehead glistening with sweat. "Efua, tell us this is some kind of misunderstanding. Tell us you didn't do this behind our backs." His voice was no longer proud and booming. It was almost pleading. Her mother, pale and trembling, added faintly, "Why didn't you say anything before? We didn't know. We thought—" Her words trailed off, choked by the crushing weight of her own guilt. The relatives exchanged shocked glances, their whispering growing louder now. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others murmured, "So, it's true then, the entire house is hers." The very same people who had been laughing at Afua's expense just an hour earlier, now stared at her with a newfound respect, even a hint of fear. Their mocking smiles had vanished, replaced by an uneasy, awkward silence. For the first time since she had arrived, Efua did not feel like the outsider. The power that had been systematically taken from her was now firmly back in her hands. And every single person in that room knew it. Her parents could no longer look her in the eye. Kofi had lost his voice, and Uma sat frozen, staring blankly at the table. All their confidence, all their boasting, all their pride had evaporated in a single, stunning moment. Efua remained calm, her face steady, though her heart pounded with a quiet, triumphant strength. She did not need to shout. She did not need to gloat. She simply sat there and let the undeniable truth speak for itself. And in that heavy silence, the shift was absolute. The family that had once dismissed her so cruelly now stood in her shadow. For the first time, they realized they had underestimated her, and the pale, horrified look on their faces told her everything she needed to know. Efua rose slowly from her chair, her movements calm and deliberate, yet filled with an undeniable strength. The whispers in the room stopped instantly, and every eye turned to her. She looked at her parents first, then at Kofi and Ama, and finally let her gaze sweep across the faces of the relatives who had been enjoying her humiliation just a short while ago. Her voice was steady, not raised, but each word carried a weight that pressed down into the thick silence. "You pushed me aside in my own home," she said, her tone firm and utterly controlled. "You made me feel like I didn't belong here, like I was less than everyone else, simply because I am not married. But today, you all see the truth. This house was always mine. And now, I want you to leave my home." The words fell like a judgment, sending a final, powerful shockwave through the room. Kofi's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ama looked down at her lap, completely unable to meet Efua's clear, steady eyes. Their parents sat frozen, their faces pale, the pride and authority they once wielded stripped away in an instant. Even the relatives who had been whispering and pointing earlier now sat in a deeply uneasy silence, their shame clear on their faces. Efua didn't shout. She didn't show any anger. She didn't need to. Her profound calmness was more powerful than any argument could ever be. She stood there with her head held high, no longer the forgotten daughter they had ignored, no longer the unmarried sister they had mocked. For the first time, she wasn't asking for a small space at their table. She was calmly and quietly claiming the entire table as her own. Her parents looked at her, their eyes filled with a lifetime of regret they could not possibly voice. The truth was too heavy, too absolute for them to fight. Kofi shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clenching and unclenching his fists. But even he knew there was absolutely nothing he could do. The power he once thought he had over her was gone forever. The silence stretched on, heavy and undeniable. Ifua took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She didn't need their applause or their validation. She had her dignity, she had her strength, and she had her grandmother's final, protective gift that had given her back everything they had tried so cruelly to take away. At that moment, her family finally realized what they had done. They had underestimated the quiet daughter, the one they had so carelessly pushed aside. And now, they sat frozen in their shame while she turned and walked away. Her head held high, no longer a victim, but the true and undisputed owner of her life and her home.